Okay, signal over noise. Build your own factfulness filter. Does it ever feel like you're drowning in a deep pool of misinformation and disinformation masquerading as something worth knowing? Or perhaps something more, something eye-opening or game-changing? We live in chaotic times where the velocity of information moves faster than fact-checking ever can. Or, in other words, a lie can do a lap of the earth before the truth has found its feet. To navigate these times effectively, maintaining a realistic understanding of the world as it is, not simply as your thought leaders would have you believe it to be for their own uncharitable aims, we're going to need a toolkit or a set of razors with which to sift through the noise or the endless static and isolate, focus upon, and amplify the signal. We must find what is true and what is worth knowing. In today's episode of Signal Over Noise, each of Sam and I will pitch our own playbook, Mine's Got 5 Steps, on the back of our book review of Hans Rosling's 2018 book Factfulness that we've just got around to reviewing last week, 8 years after it was published. Sam, how are you feeling?
I'm pretty hopeful. I like what you did there as well, mate. We're here to turn up the signal.
Yeah, and I think it's worth pointing out before we get into it that we're both workshopping and editing as we go our own factfulness filters, and the purpose of today's episode is not one-size-fits-all prescription or solution. It's sharing our learning with the masses, with the audience, and each other, and workshopping it as we go. And yeah, so the take-home really is take what's useful, disregard the rest, and crack on and give it a go, really. Without further ado, let's get into mine. I've broken it down into 5 steps, all of which hopefully have sort of a catchy soundbite, which allows me to recall it and use it easily without having to remember too much. Step 1, the medium is the message. Depth, detail, and mastery or expertise can't be achieved in 160 characters. Timeliness and boundless breadth cannot be found in books. So pick your poison, understand your favored medium of information, has strengths and weaknesses, and where important to you, address those weaknesses. That's number 1. Sam, anything?
Yeah, mate. I'm just kind of like reflecting on like 24-hour news cycles. One of the things that he talks about, and I'm sure you'll come on to it later, and so will I in more detail, is these fantastical headlines. And have you ever watched a 24-hour news channel? Effectively, they work by repeating the same headlines, like, I don't know, every 15 minutes. It's almost like a loop. They're not on an actual loop, but they're repeating the same news. And you're kind of like drawn in and you think, okay, this is everything's happening. But because they're trying to grab your attention, we'll use the most extreme, like emotive headlines. They won't just be, something boring and basic. So in that particular medium, it'd be like, okay, cool. I'm aware. They're not going to give me like a breadth of and depth of knowledge. They're just going to give me surface level, high level headlines that are designed to grab my attention and keep me on this channel. Perhaps not similar to other mediums, to be fair.
Though perhaps in that case, if they're looping the same headlines again and again, it's worth noting that the medium isn't going to give you more if you give more to it. So if you watch something that's on a 15-minute or 30-minute loop for 3 hours, you're not going to get much more out of it than if you watch it once or twice, are you? And I just think that, there's such a surplus amount of knowledge and information going on, and we can know everything very thinly and broadly, or we can know something really sort of thick and in details, but we can't know that much of the world to depth. Next, this will be factfulness filter number 2 for me. As the island of my knowledge grows, so expands the shoreline of my own ignorance. To me, this metaphor has several potential translations. I like to visualize basically each of us stood on an island of our own knowledge in a sea of ignorance. And as each of us goes on to possess ever more knowledge, they reclaim land. And so that's really exciting and sort of shores up your footing in the world. But one of the necessary consequences of that is basically you're going to progressively become more and more aware of just how little you know about a lot. And you're just going to increase the contact area essentially between what you do and don't know. So this does go to Hans Rosling's point in Factfulness of humility, or the ability to eat humble pie again and again and put your hand up and say, I don't know enough yet, or I'd like to know more, as a sort of superpower that advances our pursuit of truthfulness or factfulness. And yeah, I guess why we want to shore up that island of knowledge that we're building everything on is essentially when we're on dry land, we can sort of predict and reasonably well control what will and won't happen in terms of our actions and the consequences. We know what our relationships are likely to yield and what the likely foreseeable outcomes of doing something or not doing something will be. Whereas when we go out into the sea, there are beasts out there that are much more adept at swimming than we are. And we should be greedy in our pursuit of knowledge because it's not fungible or exhaustible. Our possession of knowledge empowers us and shores up our position without taking away from others. So that's it. Fortunately, like I said, it's an unintentional consequence of increasing our understanding and knowledge of the world is to become more aware of our ignorance. This is also known as the, I think, Dunning-Kruger curve of when you know very little about something, you feel like you know it all, then you learn more, and it's a bit devastating because you realize how much you don't know, and then you eventually become an expert in the thing. But that's number 2 for me. As the island of my knowledge grows, so expands the shoreline of my ignorance, and that's okay. Next, number 3. The more fantastical a claim, the more fantastic the evidence I expect to see. If you see an outlandish claim, demand proof and check motives. Is the person making a claim about to present you with a big bill or invoice? What is the proof of their claim? Does it withstand some pressure? And how impactful would accepting this new knowledge be to you or I? If the answer is really quite large, then we should be scaling our scrutiny and our stress testing based on that likely life impact. For example, if somebody was to make an outlandish, fantastical claim about the inner workings of the planet Mercury, perhaps that it's inhabited by a species of ultra-exotic frogs, I may choose not to invest much of my finite time, energy, and intellect investigating and scrutinizing this particular claim, not because I think it does grow corn or is true, but because I'm unlikely to venture there anytime soon, and therefore it's not really worth that much to me. However, if my plumber makes the same claim about the bathroom or the kitchen pipes in my own home, I might investigate this claim, likely disprove it, and begin the search for a new plumber. Or perhaps we should ask that the burden of proof should sit with the person who stands to gain from the claim being accepted. So, if the plumber can provide me with compelling evidence of ultra-exotic frogs in my kitchen or bathroom, then, and only then, might I pay him to solve that problem. Samuel.
Dude, this feels like politics, right? Turn on TV and you hear some absolutely fantastical story about people eating dogs, or I don't know what some of these other silly stories are. I'll go on to one, actually a big one, when it comes to my ones. But, by asking yourself the question, what has the person who's saying this got to gain? That can hopefully shed light on why they're making a fantastical claim. And as you say, I really like the idea of the more fantastical evidence I expect to see on the other side of it. So if someone is eating dogs, where's your proof? I mean, it'll be harrowing, but it'll be fantastical as well in the same breath. So yeah, I like this one a lot.
Yeah, awesome. Next, number 4, and lifted straight from the pages of Factfulness, what would change my mind? And this is covered in Factfulness. If the answer is nothing, then you're not dealing with information, but ideology. If there's nothing in this world, no amount of evidence that would dissuade you of a belief, then it's not truth that you're seeking, but a religious devotion. So we have many beliefs that will not be disproven across lifetimes, but this is not the same as one that cannot be disproven. So clinging to outdated beliefs is a surefire way of becoming a dinosaur in your own time and missing out on the opportunities that technological innovations provide if we choose not to believe in them. An example would be that when the automobile effectively ran the horse-drawn carriage off the roads in the early 20th century, somebody who wed themselves to the idea that horses are the best and most efficient means of travel were unable to update their worldview and seize the opportunity provided with cars. So we must be open to even our most fundamental beliefs being disproven or rewritten, because over a long enough time frame, almost all that has gone before has been some level of mistaken. For example, microbes exist, bacteria and viruses cause diseases, but for most of the length of time, the history of medicine, healers had no conception of them. And, prior to the invention of the microscope, it didn't even sort of pose itself as a potential truth. So, yeah, things that we take for granted now, most of human history, we weren't privy to that information. There's plenty more to come. And therefore, even things that we sort of think of as just immutable truths, we shouldn't say, I can easily sort of get rid of that. But we should say, if I am presented with legit, robust data that contradicts this belief, then I will change my views. So, yeah, that's number 4 for me. Maybe you've got a better example, Sam?
No. I think it's really hard, isn't it, not to get stuck in your ways and to be open to new ideas. Uh, I don't want to old person bash, but it is a stereotype that like my ways are set and they will not change. And I don't think about our grandmother, who was the loveliest woman, but she had very particular, strange views of the world, which weren't going to change no matter how hard you pushed or pulled. So I do think there's something very human in the idea of like, no, this is fact. This will not change, and I'm not willing to change either. So yeah, I think it's important that we continue to acknowledge and expand our learning. And also, I guess in reality, do you think over time, like for example, in the case of an old person where the circumstances and the truth might actually change over the decades? I mean, I was gonna say, how would you revisit that? I guess you just have to be open to reconsidering your previous conclusions. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe there's just something in that to remind ourselves as the time goes on, the probability of these previous conclusions not being true anymore might actually increase and things might change. The world around us might actually shift as much as we are in our decades of existence.
Yeah, and I think that maybe a metaphor for this would be pouring out concrete versus a rubberized material. So if you pour out concrete, it starts malleable; it will fit any shape you put it into, but then it sets hard with time. And I think, like you say, we probably, as we build more evidence over the years, or become more resistant to alternative ideas and opinions, concretize, and concrete can become really brittle and crack quite easily, and it kind of ends up developing a fragility, and it can't withstand change beyond a point. Whereas maybe there are other materials that actually you heat them up again and they bend and they're malleable. And maybe that's terrible metaphor, but essentially it's better to bend with the wind than snap because of it. And the body of human knowledge that we possess is ever expanding. There are people who lived through, the revelation discovery that we didn't have a Earth-centered universe. We rotate around the sun, and there's something much bigger going on. Also, the whole flat Earth thing, that was quite a big insight, and it was a good way to become a dinosaur and miss out on the opportunities presented by the new information becoming available.
I think just to underline that, your metaphor there was actually perfect. Concrete, you can become concretized, but concrete can become fragile. I think that's a very well put explanation of that. Because, yeah, we live in a time of constant change. What's going on outside is not sitting or standing still. So being able to, what did you say, bend with the wind? I like that, rather than shatter. Yeah, I think that's important to try and remember.
Yeah. And finally for me, number 5 is, does this improve my actions or just my emotions? And so, yeah, why are we seeking out this information, and what are we taking from it? Are we seeking out information that increases fear, or bolsters your sense of identity or righteousness, without actually improving the decisions that you go on to make? If so, that's really noise. It's sort of fluff that can sort of maybe like, fluffing your pillows or stuffing hay in the duvet, like make you feel more comfortable, but it doesn't actually increase your utility, productivity, effectiveness in the world. And often we find ourselves seeking out information that fulfills the role of satisfying that confirmation bias, that we go out and find things, little tidbits or kernels of truth that reaffirm ourselves and our own pre-existing worldview and our desire to basically see ourselves as good or right or clever, rather than seeking out a bit of discomfort that might actually confront worldviews, push us, hold us accountable, and maybe even help us grow. So, to turn on the news TV show, your 24-hour show, and sort of tut and murmur how awful. Frankly, unless you're willing to actually change your own behaviors subsequent to watching it and your actions, mostly it's a waste of time. If all you're doing is feeling things privately, or perhaps worse, feeling them performatively out and acting them out loud in front of an audience so that they can see how empathetic and compassionate you are, there are better opportunities to demonstrate empathy and compassion with genuine actions that have a recipient. So to this end, I recommend doing a cold debrief or review how you've integrated whatever media consumption you're into, whether it's news, social media, into leading a more morally ambitious life. You might find that some mediums of information are genuinely giving you bang for the buck. Some are basically allowing you to feel good about how good and kind and generous you are without actually making a difference to anyone's life. And maybe some of them are kind of more inert. So that's why I would also recommend categorizing truths and what is true in the world into three buckets: the high utility bucket, the inert bucket, and the disempowering or the wasteful bucket. So most truths are worth knowing because, like I said, they build out that firmness of predictability in the world and knowing how the world operates, and therefore being able to be an effective agentic person. But the most important ones are the ones that you can directly employ in your life to better meet your own goals. For example, the truth of knowing that chips or fries are very moreish, calorie dense and nutrient poor is high utility knowledge for anyone who aspires to manage their own body shape and weight. Then in the next bucket, you'd have inert knowledge, which is essentially the chips or fries of your information diet, the stuff that you can sort of easily gorge yourself on more and more of without really extracting anything important from it. So for me, this is sports news. I'm not that invested in the outcomes of most sports and most teams, but I quite like consuming the news because I know I'm not going to get too riled up or angered or stimulated before bed. So, I know far too many like tennis and rugby scores of teams or players that don't mean anything to me personally, for which I have no application in my life. But they also fail to provoke any negative emotional response. So that's the inert bucket. And then lastly, we have that disempowering knowledge. Pretty hard to find too many examples of this. So I think you do have to think about the opportunity cost of what you could otherwise be doing with the time. But I was thinking maybe one thing is on the objective level, that so far as we understand at the moment, according to leading physicists, there's going to be this thing called the inevitable heat death of the universe, which predicts that based on our current measurements, the universe is expanding and cooling exponentially. And there'll eventually come a time where everything is sufficiently far from everything else that no further heat generating reactions can occur. Everything goes dark and quiet. Now, if one believes something must last literally forever and be truly permanent for it to matter, this would be very disempowering news. If instead we are thinking and acting on a sort of human-centric, human lifetime or multiples of human lifetimes perspective, and short-term things can still have meaning and importance and matter, then maybe we can disregard this and find it not to be too disempowering. Samuel, thoughts before we move on to yours?
Oh, you had me. What did you call it? There's 3 words you just used to describe when the universe starts to cool down. Say the phrase again.
The inevitable heat death of the universe. That would be when it finishes cooling, not when it starts.
My goodness me, that's terrifying. You completely just threw me with that. I had these horrible images in my head.
Mm,
But
mm.
anyway, I was also quite glad to at least assume, perhaps incorrectly, that this isn't happening next week. As you say, perhaps this is happening over potentially multiple slash hopefully millions of people's lifetimes before that happens. Yeah, so one thing that stood out to me there was the just the tut tut murmur. How awful. It just feels so spot on. Like, and I think about news consumption it is, and I'm going to go into this in a bit more detail when it comes to my filters. But it does just feel like emotional theatre. It is just a big play, trying to grab your attention with your emotions. Um, so yeah, I totally feel that. Have you been able to identify and remove any disempowering mediums or inputs from your life?
Yeah, I think probably a lot of it is news. News from areas that I don't currently possess the sort of power and leverage to influence geographically those parts of the world. So it can sound quite callous to say, but actually the flip side is that it sounds good, but you're not really doing anything about it. Like I don't need to know what's going on in rural Rwanda at any given moment. So whilst it seems important to maintain a global perspective to make better decisions, like a lot of my decisions are not going to be influenced by what's going on there. And I don't feel like I'm in a position or stage in my life to stop what I'm currently doing, move there and try and make a positive difference. And enter the fray in a meaningful way. So a lot of it is consuming negative news stories that I won't act on. That's the main one for me, I think.
I do like the example you used. I gotta do the same thing with sports news. If I know I've got a moment to flick on something and I don't necessarily want to come out of it feeling drained, frustrated, sad, whatever. So you're not going to go on to the news. It'll be more a case of what's going on in BBC Sports. The Winter Olympics is on. Let's see who's doing what. Are there any cool clips? Which I'm not going to come out of feeling like, oh, that was draining, depressing, or whatever. If anything, it'll probably be quite the opposite, particularly with the Olympics. Cool. All right, nice work. Do you want to just quickly just recap and remind me what those 4 things were? 5 things?
Yeah. So number one, the medium is the message. We can know a little about a lot or a lot about a little. We've got to choose what's most important to us and not kid ourselves that we're doing more than we are. Number 2 is, as the island of my knowledge grows, so expands the shoreline of my own ignorance. So basically, knowledge is power because it's understanding and predicting our world around us, so long as it's true knowledge. And basically, the unintended consequence of this is we become more aware of how little we know about everything overall. We should lean into that, eat the humble pie, and move forwards. 3 is the more fantastical a claim, the more fantastic the evidence I expect to see. So, we should demand high degrees of high quality evidence if somebody's going to make a big claim that's going to potentially change the sort of trajectory of our lives. 4 is what would change my mind. If the answer's nothing, then it's no longer a pursuit of truth, it's a belief system. And those can quite quickly get levered away from reality and truth. And finally, number 5, does this improve my actions or just my emotions? So that's if we want to be effective, agentic people, we need to audit our inputs of knowledge and information and say, okay, is this useful to me? Or is it just that I feel good? I can pat myself on the back or, rub my own head because now I know this thing and I can then display empathy or sympathy out loud to myself, make myself feel good or gain status from those around me. Find empowering sources of knowledge that we can sort of act on, implement and integrate. That's the 5-stepper. And now perhaps I'll sit back and enjoy a bit of emotional theatre, was it? I liked that term. As you take it away from here.
Let's do it. Cool. Okay. Yeah. So I'm pretty cynical, particularly, well, actually, generally as a personality trait, I'm the opposite of cynical. I'm quite open. However, I'm incredibly cynical of the news. And to be frank, in 2026 today, it feels like there isn't much of a gap between the news and social media. So whenever I use the phrase news, just imagine I'm talking about traditional news and the likes of Facebook and Instagram, etc. So with that in mind, there's this quote that's been living rent-free in my head for at least the last 3 or 4 years, which is, the news is in the business of making somebody else's problem your problem. Okay. I can't remember where I heard this from, but yeah, it dawns on me every time I read a story that I'm thinking, okay, this is sad. I know this, but can I do anything to affect this? Does it actually impact me other than pulling on my emotions in that moment? And like I say, it applies to all types of media. The things that will get the shares and the engagement on social media will be the same things and the same emotions that are being triggered by traditional news outlets. They're just literally vying for your attention. That's the whole thing. It's been a bit of a wake up, really, coming back to the UK and starting to consume the BBC more often. And it almost feels like they've started to use a heck of a lot more clickbaity type headlines that don't necessarily reflect the reality of their stories. So from there, I've just kind of realized actually they're all at it. It's not just the BuzzFeeds and the Fox Newses of this world who are doing this, and the hysterical tabloid newspapers that are doing this. It's everybody. So yeah, it doesn't mean that there won't be relevant news to you, of course, and you shouldn't care, but just be aware that with limitless scrolling in particular, imagine how quickly you're going to consume all relevant stories and posts that your friends have posted. Particularly, as you get older, you're kind of like your friendship circle starts to shrink. Not like dramatically, but it does. And just frankly, like just kind of audit your own posting as well. Like, how often do you actually post on social media? If you're going on social media 4 or 5 times a day, if you've got a group of, 20, let's say, friends that you care about, how often do you post? How often do you think they post? And then by extension, how much actual content is being generated for you and your friends to consume that you actually care about, that is not just the algorithm trying to find random stuff. And of course, that's how social media works as well nowadays. It's about influencers, and what's the opposite of an influencer? Influenced. Maybe there's some truth in that, the opposite of an influencer is influenced. Anyway, so that's just a quote that I try and remember from time to time when I see a news story and I think, oh, that's not good. But also, does it actually impact me? Is the news platforms, the media platform, medium, actually just trying to get my attention by presenting me with someone else's problems? Okay, so I've got a 3-step framework. All right, so and this is adapted from Rosling's 10 rules of thumb. I actually did have the rules of thumb open in this bad boy, but I seem to have lost it, and I'm not going to try and find it now because that's going to make this real janky, although I technically am. There we go. Factfulness rules of thumb. So adapted from that, these are the questions I ask myself when I come across a news story. First thing, what are the numbers? What's the denominator? Okay, so as a rule, I refuse lonely numbers. If you hear a number, a single number, you don't have anything to hang that truth on. Do you know, is that number, like in a world as big as we exist in, where there's 8 billion people, I cannot even start to fathom what 8 billion people looks like, or even conceive how many people that truly is. If you hear some number, X hundreds of people, something happened to them, I'll let your imagination figure out what that thing was. Is that really a big dent? Is that an outlier? Is that per 8 billion? Is that per, 1,000? 100 out of 1,000 seems like a big number. 100 out of 8 billion feels like a really, really small number. But frankly, our brains struggle to comprehend that in the first place. So first thing, what's that out of? Also, is that in a given period of time? What does that number look like relative to history as well. And we'll come on to that one in the second rule. So the second question I will ask is, what's the 20 to 50 year trend? So this number or this statistic or this fact or story, what is this relative to the trend? We shouldn't be fearful of an outlier. An outlier is just that, an outlier. If we start to see trends moving in the wrong direction, of course, then we can start to consider that perhaps things aren't so rosy. So yeah, throughout Factfulness, Rosling mentions that things like extreme poverty, child mortality, girls' education have improved sharply over the last 20 to 50 years, even while we might still assume and hear these horrific stories from across the world that might make us assume that these things are actually going in the opposite direction. And the third question I ask is, what instinct is this triggering in me? Okay, so what negative emotion or feeling is this going to trigger? Is it going to be negativity, fear, urgency? What are other things it could be? Destiny, blame? Deliberately naming this and then applying the antidote will help you to figure out, okay, let's put this in relative terms. Maybe the algorithm, that news presenter is actually deliberately trying to invoke a particular instinct to grab my attention and, by extension, time, advertising, money. Okay, so here's an example. I'm going to put this into action. So, as you know, or at least you know, and the dear listener will now learn, lived in Canada for a few years. I basically met a lot of Americans. Regularly, they'd ask me, yeah, isn't London really dangerous? I remember thinking, I mean, there are dodgy bits, but it's a world city. Like, I don't ever remember feeling like it was particularly unsafe. Not more or less so than you would expect. Like, I mean, this is whilst walking around cities like New York, Boston, Chicago, and you kind of think, I don't know, particularly like in a country full of guns, it seems a bit rich to be making this kind of statement. However, though, and also frankly, when considering moving back here to London, I didn't have any qualms. I didn't think, it feels less safe. None of my friends had said I've experienced things or felt any less safe than they previously had done. However, you can see with like the likes of Donald Trump and billionaires like Elon Musk suggesting that the British capital has descended into lawlessness, I can see why there was this perception abroad. So I was surprised. I mentioned this in the last podcast when I saw a news story which from the New York Times, which says London's homicide rate was the lowest since comparable records began in 1997. People like me, 1997 doesn't feel like that long ago, but actually it was 28, 29 years ago at this point. So a good chunk of time ago. And data supports this with the Met's commissioner, that's the chief of the Metropolitan Police in London, stating that London is safer than every US state or thereabouts, let alone all big cities in the US. And it is. Rather alarmingly, I'm going to see if Owen has a feeling about the stats, the crime stats.
I've got a strong feeling about the stats because I've been hurriedly typing it into the internet. I reckon that the annual murder or homicide rate in London is about 1 in 100,000 people. In LA, it's about 7.5 in 100,000 people. And in Chicago, it's about 14.5. So that is to say, your probability as a Londoner is about 1/7 of what it would be, and 1 in 14 of what it would be for LA and Chicago, respectively.
That's hanging. Honestly, I don't know. I couldn't say the exact reason why that is. I mean, I'm sure guns don't help. Sorry, I'm not making a political protest there. You do whatever you want, USA. But it seems a bit rich, doesn't it, to think that the president of the United States and his weird megalomaniac buddy, Elon Musk, is also making these kinds of statements. Based on what? What have they got to offer? What have they got to gain from this? And that's something that you went over a fair chunk, which is just considering what the person making the fantastical claim has to gain from that. So with this, it wasn't only in the US where this opinion that crime was getting worse in the UK, particularly in London, was happening. It was also an opinion shared by the British public as well. So according to YouGov, the UK public's concern about crime went to an all-time low in 2016, which is when people were more concerned with Brexit. However, it then quadrupled by 2019 and then plummeted during the pandemic when people, of course, had other things to worry about. Now, last year, the public's concern about crime had risen again. Why? Well, I read a crude news media adage yesterday, and that is, if it bleeds, it leads. Effectively reflecting that the most violent news stories will always go first, including serious crime, just to capture public attention. All right. But in reality, let's apply these 3 filters and see what's actually happening. Let's let the data do the talking, not these people who have got things to gain from garnering our attention and our fear. Right. First question. What are the numbers and what's the denominator? So I went onto the Metropolitan Police website and I found these numbers. So the denominator in this case is history. Okay, I want to know over the short term, what direction is the homicide rate going? So between 2019, which is only 6 years ago, and 2024, that's when the data goes up to at the moment, they have more than halved the number of homicides in London, which is a significant drop. So that's obviously a push in the right direction. All right. So that's question number 1. So you got Donald Trump and Elon Musk telling you the British capital has gone lawless. However, homicides have halved in the last 6 years. Next question. Is that a more recent phenomenon? Let's consider the 20 to 50 year trend on this. This is experienced both locally and regionally as well. Across England and Wales, they showed that many high volume crimes, that is burglary, car crime, and some forms of violence crime, are down by close to 90% over 30 years. Okay, 90% less crime, even while concern about crime has been rising. Those stats are from the Office for National Statistics. Again, another reputable source that is not trying to sell you of some agenda. It is just telling you the cold, hard truth. So that's across England and Wales. So like, I repeat that, 90% reduction in the rate of high volume crimes. That's really significant. Now, what about extending that across the same homicide statistic in London? My notes have escaped me here. However, I do remember the numbers. So since 1995, those numbers have dropped by 66%. The number of homicides, it was by 2/3, and that's over the 26-year period there. So halved in the last 6 years and dropped by 2/3 over the past 25, 26 years. So again, showing like really positive movements in the right direction, despite the fact that the public is feeling more and more fearful of crime in the capital. And and frankly, as a cause of this, as we well know, is people being told, what was it? If it bleeds, it leads. So yeah. And then the third question we ask is, which instinct is this triggering me? So what we're doing here, let's just remind ourselves, is we're going to name the instinct that is triggering and then deliberately attempt to apply the relevant antidote. Okay. So first thing, this is triggering in me negativity and fear. Okay. When I see like on Reddit actually, but I'm sure these get shared on the likes of TikTok and Instagram as well, coverage of people snatching phones in the middle of the day. It's so brazen, be the middle of the day, middle of the city and the busy London streets. It's pretty crazy. And it is quite interesting to watch. It's like just shocking. And frankly, like to Mr. Trump and Mr. Musk's points, yeah, it feels pretty lawless when you see it. But the reality of it is, as these people, they pour fuel onto this fire and start lying and kind of extrapolating that out to say, oh, actually, also on top of this, like terrible stuff, there are record high levels of violent crime. But the reality, as we've seen here from the stats, are that's not actually true. So if a few stolen phones is the price we have to pay, well, perhaps it's a price worth paying, which leaves me with the filter outcome, which is a conclusion as to why applying these 3 questions. What's the outcome of this filter? Of course, crimes are bad. Violent crimes are particularly bad and rightly provoke fear instincts. We want to be careful. We want to be safe. I want everyone, whoever listens to this podcast, to be safe and careful. However, if you wanted to come to London, the statistics show that now is probably the best time in decades to do it. Forget what the Musk and Trump say of this world. Actually, the stats prove that it's sensible and safe. But remember to keep your phone in your pocket. All right, okay. So that's my take. Remember, the media is actively vying for your attention and will actively try to harvest your emotions, perhaps by not telling you the full truth. But just remember, the news is in the business of making somebody else's problem your problem. All right. So just to recap, my 3 filters are: what are the numbers and what's the denominator? Don't accept lonely numbers, like a single one-off number. What is that relative to? What's the 20 to 50-year trend? What direction is the world actually going in with respect to that particular topic? And what instincts is this triggering in me? Is this intentionally trying to garner fear or a negative emotion, and then try and apply the relevant anecdote upon that? Any thoughts, though?
Nice. So thanks. I think that's really good. And I think maybe it's probably more focused on high utility is like, a screen or a filter to pass the next packet of information you see online through than mine, which was maybe a little bit high concept and theoretical. Some of my points I think were not, but anyway, I like the news is in the business of trying to make somebody else's problem your problem. I think that's quite a powerful framework or frame through which one might become more motivated to break up with it to some extent. And like you said, for news, read basically social media also. Again, in the competition for our eyeballs and eardrums, it's a race to the bottom, and there's nothing that they won't put up there. And if it provokes fear, outrage, whatever it is, so long as you're watching. So know that. And yes, swerve it. I think also of what I can't remember what the stats are, maybe 700 hours of YouTube footage are uploaded every minute or something wild. Maybe that's wrong, but there's a massive surplus of information that could be known or things that are happening that could be news. So every time something does reach your eyeballs or your eardrums, remember that for this commission, for this thing that's been produced, curated, and then thrust in front of you, there's a lot of omission. There's a lot of stuff that hasn't got there that perhaps it's not newsworthy because it's quite pleasant or it fails to invoke those instincts and emotions that you're talking about. Or perhaps it's bias and spin, and there's an ulterior motive and a reason why they want you to think about crime in London. Maybe that's serving their agenda in some way. But yeah, the only way to kind of know whether or not that they have a point and whether or not their agenda really is just looking out for us and making sure we can travel the world safely and avoid dangerous hotspots is, like you say, taking the data, making it relative and relevant to other things of import, like how does it compare to where you actually are right now, and then grounding the claims in the context of history and time. So yeah, I liked it.
Actually, I was pleasantly surprised by how easy it was to get this information as well. And I'm not talking about, there's a couple of sources really. Things like YouGov surveys are very easy to get hold of. honestly, if you Google things, like particularly about public opinion, there's often like some sort of poll that's happened. I can't recall what the other services are called, but Politico and things like that. But like when it comes to like crime stats, like they're so widely reported. Same with immigration numbers. Anything that's done on a national level will be reported by services like the Office for National Statistics. So just fact checking these things like is really, really helpful. I remember a number of years ago, student loans, when they increased the tuition fees in the UK they effectively tripled it in like 2012 or something. And there was this rumor going around that the Scottish MPs had been voting on our tuition fee increase, and they'd been all voting to increase it because, it would be better for them and it would be beneficial financially for them if the English students would be paying a higher tuition fee. And I remember thinking, this doesn't sound right. This sounds horrible. Why would somebody do that? And I went on to the voting stats at the time, and I saw that every single Scottish MP, irrespective of their party, even Conservative, had voted for them to remain at the same level. So a very quick fact check on that. I was very quick to be like, aha. They actually, they actually don't feel that way. And I remember this was around the time of the Scottish independence referendum.
Indie Ref, yeah.
Indie Ref, that's it. Such a cool name for such a sad concept. Sorry, I won't get political here. But I remember thinking, oh, okay, well, perhaps somebody's got something to gain from that malicious rumor being spread out there. But I now know the truth of the matter. So yeah, good fun. See us out, oh, you got this.
Okay, let's land the plane. Let's park the ship. Dock the ship. I don't know what you do with ships. So that's our 2 takes on developing a factfulness filter. Perhaps there's some workshopping still to be done. If you have enjoyed this episode, please give us a rating. If you've taken anything useful away, drop us a comment, let us know what it is, or let us know what we should know and add to our filters. Until next time, be well and do good.
Ta-ra.